Good day, everyone. We're here today with Srikanth Vishwanathan, who is the CEO of Janaagraha and Jana Urban Space Foundation, and Krishnan, who is the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at Janaagraha. Janaagraha has been working on improving India's cities and thinking about what is required for city transformation for over 2 decades now. And I think this is something we all understand, that cities are critical for economic growth, for development, and the progress of civilization, perhaps. Okay. So we're here today to speak to them and understand how do they think of the development of India's cities. Srikanth, if you could kick us off.
So cities are at the heart of growth and development for India. And it is not just economic growth, but also to fulfill our human development goals. India is already more than 500 million people living in cities, and we are expected to be more than 50% urban in the next couple of decades. So from multiple perspectives, from a livability perspective, from the perspective of economic growth, but also the quality of our democracy, we need to really transform our cities, and it needs to count as perhaps one of top 3 public policy and governance priorities in India. And the way we see it, the big challenge and the opportunity before India is to balance what we call the 4 E's. One is, how do we ensure that our cities contribute better and more productively to economic growth and job creation? Second, that the gains from such economic growth is more broad-based and far more equitable in terms of access to jobs, opportunities, and services, infra and services. That such growth is balanced with environment sustainability.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And all of these 3 E's of economic growth, equity, and environment are circumscribed by democratic engagement.
Okay.
That democracy and citizenship is an important lever that achieves the other 3 E's. And herein lies the tantalizing opportunity and challenge for India over the next few decades. And we believe if we need to deliver on outcomes around economic growth, equity, aspects of infrastructure and services, environmental considerations, and so on, it's important that we recognize the significance of city systems.
Okay.
We believe there are 3 city systems which underlie several manifestations of the city that we as citizens experience on a daily basis. Whether you take housing or water supply or traffic, public transport, air quality, we think there are 3 critical determinants of all of these. They are planning and design,
Mm-hmm.
decentralized participatory governance,
Mm-hmm.
and state capacities. By planning and design, we refer to the governance of spaces and places in a city. Right? How do you look at the spatial aspects of a city across urban planning, design of public infrastructure and services, and built environment? By decentralized participatory governance, we refer to the design of governance systems in cities. Essentially, how empowered are our mayors and councils? How deep is democracy in cities in terms of voice and agency for citizens? And in state capacities, we look at public finances, human resource management, adequacy and skills, and possibly digitalization peeking into the future.
So let's dig deeper into all 3 of these. So to recap, we're trying to achieve equitable economic growth, keeping in mind environmental considerations while ensuring citizen engagement towards the achievement of these goals. And we're looking at design, we're looking at capacities, and we're looking at political representation.
We're looking at planning and design.
Planning and design.
We're looking at governance systems in cities and state capacity.
And can you perhaps tell us what is missing or what do we need to do better in all 3 of these?
I mean, it's a whole range of areas that we'll need to transform across the full range of laws, policies, institutional mechanisms, accountability frameworks, and execution capacities. There's a whole range of things that have to be transformed across all of these 3 areas. But at the heart of it is the recognition and acknowledgement of the city not being a sector, but being a place.
So it'd be great to understand this a little better. When you say the city as a place, what really changes from today in the way you think about this problem? So when I think of governance, I think of my municipality or my municipal corporation. I'm in Bombay. When I think of capacities and resources, I understand there is a municipal budget. Bombay raises some money, some of it is spent. And when I think of design, I know there's some kind of master plan for Bombay. How would you expand on this, or what would you say? Uh, why is this not sufficient? Because this is my understanding, and what needs to improve or change, perhaps.
Yeah. I can take that. So what we mean by governing, or by seeing the city as a place, is that today, if typically most things that happen in the city are seeing the city as a consequence, really. Right? Like that, there are certain central schemes, for instance, Amrit and Swachh Bharat or whatever, and they are designed in a certain way, and the city then the starting point for the city is, okay, I have so much money available under so and so scheme. Therefore, what do I do with it? Right? Which is still not recognizing the city as a place, so to speak. Right? Whereas what we mean by flipping this, or what we mean by place-based development, is by keeping place and the people who live in the place as centrals to our decision making, which will automatically. So place is the integrator, really, right, of multiple things that happen, whether it is waste or water, right? Whether it is your parks and playgrounds, how many buses you procure, where you place your airport, where is your railway station. All of these in some way are interconnected decisions. And the unifying way to do that is by affording primacy to the place. And therefore, how do you start? Not by a scheme or not with a scheme, but by saying, okay, what does this place need? How can we get inputs from the people who govern that place, which is right now the mayor and the elected council and the city officials, as well as the people who live in the city, its citizens, to create some kind of a plan or a vision for a place from which you draw to say, okay, I have my vision. Now, how do I then realize this vision using what's available to me? Therefore, the schemes. So you see, the schemes, for instance, are neatly integrated into this unifying vision, right? So that's the change in imagination that we are seeking for our cities. And this currently, does not quite happen because of one primary reason, which is that cities are not yet, politically empowered, right? That cities, in a simple way to look at it, is that a country is also a place. Who integrates things for the countries, right? For our country, for India, right? In some way, it is the PM and the PMO. There is an equivalent institution at the state level.
It's the chief minister.
The chief minister. Arguably, there is a similar institution at the district level as well, which is a district collector. There's no elected representative there. But for a city, this is not happening at all, right? We are not able to fix accountability, single point of accountability for a city. We are not able to aggregate everything that needs to happen in a city together. We're not able to view that in aggregation, right? And that is in some way the essence of what Srikanth means when he speaks about place-based development.
Okay, so let's pick up from that single point of executive accountability idea. Today, Bombay and Bangalore have mayors. And as I understand it, these are mayors of their municipal corporation. Do you imagine a bigger role for these elected representatives? And could you help us understand what that might be?
Sure. Today, Bangalore and Bombay, incidentally, do not have.
Oh, right. Of course.
Neither
Right.
city.
Right.
Yeah, in an irony, in a bizarre circumstance, neither city, two of the largest cities in India, have an elected mayor or council in place. So that, in some ways, is symptomatic of the challenge that we're trying to solve for. But essentially, we are saying that you cannot govern the city as an aggregation of infrastructure and service priorities or projects. And when you say you need a single point of executive accountability or a single point of political accountability, the citizen of the city should be able to vote out of office or fire a poorly performing public official who is been elected to office in the city. And that is not possible in India.
And without the excuse that this is not my jurisdiction. That we know instances in Bombay where there is a billboard which has fallen and they say, actually, this is not BMC, this is railway land.
Exactly. I think democratic accountability is about public officials being answerable to citizens for outcomes. And if we feel they are falling short of that answerability or accountability, or falling short of delivering on outcomes, the citizens should have the authority and the power and the choice to vote them out of office. That's what we do at the union level and at the state level. But we are not able to do that at the city level. And therefore, the consequences that you see are the poor quality of life and the low levels of business productivity in our cities.
So how would you fix this lack of accountability? In some ways, this also comes from a lack of power, right? Which is that your elected representative always has the excuse that this is not actually my jurisdiction. I am subservient to the state. So how do we translate this that in order to have the accountability, you must also empower them with the responsibility?
Absolutely.
So what is a good paradigm or what is a good analogous structure that you imagine for India's cities?
So we have an example in India itself on the rural side.
Okay.
Relatively speaking, not in absolute terms, but relatively speaking, the structure and systems in a village in India are superior to those in a city by design. I'm not saying in terms of operating effectiveness on the ground, but in terms of design. You have a Gram Pradhan, you have Gram Sabhas, which is essentially grassroots democracy in cities. You have far greater number of functions which are handled by a Gram Panchayat compared to a town panchayat or a municipality or a municipal corporation in a city. And you have better convergence, where between water, sanitation, health, livelihoods, even climate change in several states, which are being handled at the lowest level of self-government in India.
This is a
and that
fairly,
model of having an empowered local self-government was indeed the vision of the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment. The 74th Constitutional Amendment sought to bring in elected local self-governments in India's cities. But after 32 years, that vision is yet to be realized.
So this is a fairly radical claim that you're making, right? Which is that at the Gram Panchayat level, and we always, at least a lot of us, think of villages as rural India where, things run amok and there is no planning. But your claim is a very interesting one, that the state agencies converge at the level of a village and are in some way controlled by the Pradhan or the Sarpanch of the Gram Panchayat. And this actually leads to at least a mechanism for coordination among different schemes, different pools of funds, different requirements, right? So whether it's a lake or a dustbin, whatever, garbage heap or employment, all of these are under the supervision or are directed by the Sarpanch. And you say this equivalent does not exist in a city, that there is no mechanism that enables this kind of single point of accountability.
Yeah, by and large, yes. I'm not saying those systems are working well because there are political economy factors at play. There are power equations at play. There is the design of the political party system in India that is at play. I'm not saying it's working perfectly well on the ground. I'm saying the design of those institutions is far better on the rural side than it is on the urban side. So, yes.
Interesting. So now let's translate this. We know that a bunch of villages, as India urbanizes, 50% is already urban. It is only likely to increase. What do then fledgling cities and even larger metropolitans, what do they need to learn from this Gram Panchayat model? So if you could suggest some ideas by which all of these failures of coordination can be sorted out, what would some of those mechanisms, what are those institutions you want to revive or at least ensure they function properly?
Yeah. So one instrument that we believe could solve some of these challenges is an instrument analogous to the plan that Srikanth spoke about in rural areas, right? We are calling it simply the City Action Plan. And essentially, it is a plan that in some way is determined by two primary sets of stakeholders. One is the people who are governing the cities, right? Which is the elected representatives as well as the city officials in some way. And I am subsuming those who may give technical input into that, right?
Noted.
Let's say think about this as what you're calling a municipal planning committee.
Okay.
Right. And if they don't have the necessary technical wherewithal to do some things, they can seek the necessary assistance as needed. That's one group. The second group is, of course, the citizens who live in that city, right? And especially the citizens who traditionally do not have the voice and agency to, in some way, raise issues or get solutions for their issues, right? So how do you then have an instrument that is able to bring both of these stakeholders together onto the same page regarding the one thing that both of them care about, which is their city, right? So the city action plan, put simply, is a sort of it's a plan really, which identifies critical priorities for the city as agreed upon by both these sets of stakeholders. And it is not just a plan, but it leads into a very clear roadmap, resulting in a concrete shelf of projects, which in some way is signed off by the people who matter the most, who can then use this, right? And this plan in some way can be realized as opportunities come in terms of funding. There will always be issues of funding and priority. All of those, that messiness does not really disappear. But in some way, at least through this very thoughtfully designed process, we believe that this instrument can solve for basic convergence, coordination, ownership, and planning issues in a city, especially for the small and the medium cities in India, right? The small ones, because as Srikanth spoke about the many villages, right, like that they're not overnight going to transform into really big metropolitan.
Yeah.
Right now, the reality on how they become cities is in fact a separate podcast conversation. But put simply, it's often by the stroke of a pen. So which means that for the lived reality of citizens and the governance mechanisms in that place, it doesn't change overnight. So in some way, you are able to put in place an alternative to a potentially superior system that existed, even as thousands or hundreds of these, I would say, small villages transition into cities, right? And even for medium cities, which are not so large and which in some way I would say where all is not lost, so to speak, for some of these cities, right? You could really think about this plan as an instrument which could guide us on how to urbanize well, right? Because we have the examples of how not to urbanize, which is really the top 80 odd cities in India, right?
Right, of course.
So whatever, how not to urbanize. So in some way, we are wiser, right? So how do you then at least use that? So for the biggest cities alone, again, I'm not like you will need a slightly different paradigm of a city action plan, because you will need greater metropolitan governance paradigms and so on. But I'll pause on that. But by and large, for small and medium cities, we believe that the city action plan could be that convergence and coordination instrument.
So this makes sense because it kind of touches on everything that you spoke about earlier, where you say, look, the Gram Panchayat has a history and some kind of capacity, learned capacity of making plans, which look at everything that the village needs, and then they go look out for funds, and they know that there are various pools of money available through various central or state schemes, and these kind of converge under the leadership of the Sarpanch. Smaller cities or villages becoming towns can retain this memory because they've just been doing it. It's not an overnight change. And perhaps as they grow bigger, you can continue this sort of grassroots Gram Sabha converting to, I guess, ward sabhas as envisioned in the constitutional amendment. Now, that kind of makes sense to me. Tell me about the greater metropolitan. How do you manage a beast like Bombay, or Bangalore for that matter, where there are 5 different parastatals? Somebody does electricity, somebody does water, somebody does transport. We know the common story that everybody digs up the same patch of road 5 times. How do you think of getting where we are today without mayors? What is an ideal future look like?
India needs a model of metropolitan governance. It's somewhat appalling that in the 21st century, India does not have a model of governing really large cities. And this often is not discussed. We sometimes in urban discourse, we assume that the 74th Amendment has all the answers. It does not.
Okay.
The 74th Constitutional Amendment does not have a model of metropolitan governance. And that's actually impacting us hugely and adversely across many of our large cities. And we need to fix that. I think that an interesting model of metropolitan governance, there may be many models around the world that we can learn from, is of Greater London, where you have an integrating, coordinating authority for the larger metropolitan area, which a large group of people identify as their city and claim ownership over it, ascribe belonging to it, and so on. And this integrating, coordinating authority, which is like the government of the city, looks at aspects of housing, economy of the city, public transport and connectivity, and so on. The bigger issues which are best solved at the metropolitan level. But there will be smaller municipalities which handle issues of water, waste, sanitation, street lighting, etc., which are best handled at an even lower level than the metropolitan area. And that model has been eluding India now for decades, which is why in a city like Mumbai, probably the metropolitan area has a population upwards of 20 million people. If I were to take a rough overlap between the urban agglomeration as per Census 2011 and a metropolitan area, more than 20 million people today call themselves Mumbaikars. You have a BMC that only looks at roughly 60% of that population.
Right.
And possibly an even lesser percentage of the area. So people from perhaps even Badlapur and Ambernath and Ulhasnagar and Vasai Virar and Dombivli and Thana and Kalyan, everybody calls themselves a Mumbaikar.
Yep.
But they're all governed by individual municipal corporations, which do not have an integrating, coordinating authority. And then to complicate matters even further, you have a broad spectrum of city parastatal agencies, like, for example, the Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authority. You have state parastatal authorities, like, for example, the MHADA, the MHADA. And you have state departments, like the Mumbai Traffic Police and the Mumbai City Police, all of which govern the city and or provide infrastructure and services, and therefore are accountable to the citizens of Mumbai. But there is no way in which a Mumbaikar is able to exact that accountability.
So you're talking of a layer between the state government and what we have today, which is the municipal corporation, which fathomably could encompass Bombay, Thane, Vashi, some parts of Mira Bhayandar, or whatever we consider Greater Bombay area. And so you will have some kind of empowered representative who will oversee the coordination across all of these agencies?
I would characterize it a little differently, because I fear that if we position it like this, which is what is happening in Bangalore to a limited extent, then there is a public reaction which appears to suggest that the state is now trying to control the city through the back door, which can happen sometimes. But if you reposition it as saying, we are now upgrading the BMC, which by name is the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation or the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. You're upgrading that to the status of a government of the city, which therefore serves as the integrating, coordinating authority. And it is the government of the city. So rather than calling it an authority, I would call it as the Mumbai city government.
And this would then incorporate, which means the local functions currently done by the Thane Municipal Corporation continue to function.
Absolutely.
They just get sort of coordinated, and the people of Thane also then get a say in voting for the city government of Mumbai, because it then concerns all their lives. And so this is almost another layer of government, right? So then would you vote for your local council and you would vote for the city government?
Yes.
Yeah.
You would. But the additional aspect is, today the citizen of Thane does not have a voice in public transport, does not have a voice in urban planning, does not possibly have a voice in water supply in certain cases, in certain cities, does not have a voice in housing, does not have a voice in employment and growth. So actually, most aspects of our life, which are critical to our lives, are not governed by the municipal corporation. So we are saying, let's bring governance and service delivery closer to the people.
And the various parastatals will then be accountable to this city government, as opposed to being accountable to the state, as I understand they are currently.
Yes, absolutely.
So I get the governance layer. I get that then this entity will also be responsible for planning and design.
Yes.
And what would it be? What would the financial autonomy of this entity be? Would it just be taxes from all the neighborhoods? How does this entity have economic might, so to speak?
Yeah, I'll start. Srikanth, you can add. So fundamentally, if you talk about the biggest cities in India, they already have a significant economic impulse, right? Obviously, they are economic powerhouses and with GDP equivalent to countries or whatever, even right, like other smaller countries. So obviously, the principle is that in scheme design or in grant design from the finance commission, etc., they don't need free money, right? They are anyway not very grant dependent.
Okay.
Just save that and redirect it where grants are needed to cities which do not really have that much of an economic impulse, do not have that many sources of revenue and so on. Right? That's one. The second is even then there would be some kind of a deficit. If you estimate scientifically what is the infrastructure requirement that Mumbai may need for the next 10, 20 years of growth, and you look at the current sources that Mumbai has, there may still be a deficit, in which case we believe that the one of the big tools could be to utilize its own sort of optimize land, inventorize and optimize land, for instance, as a significant source of capital. Look at other innovative PPP models, right? Some of what we're talking about actually in terms of even say municipal bonds and so on, if at all they happen in India, can only happen in these to begin with, at least.
And will the creation of a city government or a metropolitan governance, would it help you to unlock efficiencies from existing resources better?
Yes,
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. Because you'll have a more coordinated approach to governing land, to managing land, to planning, to unlocking value out of it, to connectivity, without a doubt. And I think there is ample evidence globally on why some of the economic powerhouses of the world, whether it's Singapore or it's London or it's New York, and in certain cases even cities in the global south, have larger GDPs.
So just the idea of better coordination, having political accountability and executive accountability can lead to better planning and design.
If we characterize city government as a layer that only does better coordination, it doesn't do justice to that level of government. Because primarily it's an issue of ownership, of saying who should own the city, who should be accountable for the city, who should be undertaking planning for the city, who should be delivering infrastructure and services, and who should therefore be accountable, and so on. And it so happens that that government also should coordinate between agencies. And remember that when we talk about coordination because there is already a huge array of agencies servicing the city. It's really up to that government to decide how many agencies to create or not create.
Right. Which is that it doesn't necessarily mean that when we think of imagining city government, we shouldn't think, oh, these are the existing different entities, and now how do they talk to each other?
That could be an interim measure.
Right.
It could be some milestone in the journey towards the ideal metropolitan government. To say that overnight you can't shut down certain agencies which are currently working without a better alternative.
Right.
And therefore, the interim milestone could be that these parastatal agencies are accountable to the BMC directly or indirectly. But in the ultimate destination, the destination model certainly has to be such that it's the empowered elected mayor of the city and the elected council which has a say on the design of governance in the city.
And this includes whether you need a BEST, whether you need a Navi Mumbai Transport Corporation, independent of the BEST, or you just have one greater Mumbai.
It is most likely that if you create a government of Bombay, You'll have a single unified transport system for Bombay, comprising suburban rail, comprising metro, comprising a bus system, comprising more walkable streets, and a public bike sharing system, and perhaps electric scooters or electric bikes at the first mile, and so on.
And all of these under one entity as opposed to different people trying different experiments. And
yes,
this is a very fascinating future, especially as a person living in Mumbai, to dream of a city where everything could just work.
Mumbaikars should demand for it. Mumbaikars should demand a city government which is accountable to them directly and which they can throw out. And a city government that is not just responsible for solid waste management and street lights and fixing potholes and footpaths, but which is in charge of planning and financing and transportation and creating jobs and attracting investments and talent and so on.
Okay, I'm sold. Let me know where to sign up. But I love the idea. I think it's fascinating. I think it really brings to light everything that is wrong. I mean, it is the idea of an integrated city government, which actually does everything, helps shed light on everything that is wrong today. And
one other thought on the financial autonomy piece, right? A critical missing element is also transparency, right? When we think about why our capital markets work well, right? At least to me, the answer is transparency.
Right.
There are accepted accounting and auditing standards. There is a mechanism by which you can even become an accountant. There is public disclosure that is mandatory, and that in turn inspires confidence in markets. Right. The equivalent of that for cities also is something that we are in the early stages of that journey. Right. So one thing that, for instance, where we've already succeeded is by through our advocacy with the 15th Finance Commission, by recommending that all monies under the 15th Finance Commission, can be disbursed only if cities meet a basic minimum condition of publishing their annual audited annual statements publicly. Right. So this was something that we had sort of advocated with the 15th Finance Commission and successfully implemented through a platform called City Finance, which now about 98% of all cities actually have done this, right? Have actually now uploaded audited accounts as a first step. Now, imagine the power that this transparency can unlock for enabling financing for our cities. Suddenly, where the money is coming from, where the money is going. There are multiple other gaps, further transparency gaps to be fixed. Transparency in public works, for instance, right? Like to say, who's building the road, how is he selected, those are still some time away. But this transparency journey, hand in hand with the conception of city government that we're talking about, and innovation around land, right? Looking at land in a much more strategic way, is also the answer to financial autonomy. So it's a critical pillar that transparency will prop up the ability of cities to self-finance.
I want to take that argument a step further. I think it's a very important critical aspect that Krishnan has highlighted, the one on transparency. And he also alluded to transparency in public works. Every Mumbaikar has a right to know, and the government should be obliged to share where exactly is the money going.
Right.
What are the projects happening in the city? How were the decisions on those projects taken? How was the tendering done? Who bid for it? Which contractors won it? And why did they win it? What is the budgeted and cost and timeline? What is the actual cost and timeline? Why was there a variance? And also overlaying the money on the relative quality of life. So if Cuff Parade has significantly better footpaths and Andheri does not, then it naturally follows that greater investments in footpaths should be made in Andheri.
Right.
Which means you need data on relative quality of life indicators across walkability, drivability, street lighting, public safety, you name it, across all neighborhoods in Bangalore with, therefore, what investments are being driven there? Public investments in public infrastructure and services. Because the only way for you to deliver a certain minimum level of basic infrastructure and services across all of Bombay is by directing investments accordingly and making sure those investments are utilized.
And having the voice of the people in making some of these decisions. Absolutely. Because they know best.
Yes. Unlike the union level, where there could be market sensitivities, there are sensitivities with respect to, say, expenditure on defense or expenditure in border infrastructure, on nuclear areas, or you will say there has to be secrecy around the union budget because of the potential of that to impact stock markets, etc. There is nothing like that in the city government. There's no reason why daily expenditure and daily revenues at a line item level of city governments should not be disclosed.
Yeah. And it would really help citizens knowing when that road that was dug up 6 months ago, when will that project finally end and they can start using it again. Okay. On that, thank you. And it was a fascinating idea, and you've at least left me with the hope of a Mumbai where all of this functions properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.